In this episode, I am joined by Professor Mara Einstein, digital marketing critic, author and public speaker on cult brands and influencer scams, and tenured professor of media studies at Queens College, City of New York. Mara discusses her latest book, Hoodwinked: How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults, warns about manipulative marketing techniques used in media and religions, details the 9 steps of cult recruitment, and shares case studies of religious marketing models. Mara recalls her own life journey from an early interest in religions and cults, her path through academia, studying religion and marketing, and her own discipleship under and subsequent disillusion with spiritual teacher and political activist Marianne Williamson. Mara also considers religion as product, analyzes stealth Buddhism and prosperity gospel preachers, and offers her own thoughts on how religious groups can market themselves more ethically. So without further ado, Professor Mara Einstein. Professor Mara Einstein, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I'm so delighted to talk with you today. And first of all, may I congratulate you on the publication of Hoodwinked?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that one's a long time coming. If you don't mind my saying, it's really 30 years. It's a culmination of 30 years of my work. I started looking at the intersection of first media and religion and then marketing and religion back in 1995 when I was getting my PhD. And then I had to do something else for my dissertation because I wanted to get my degree done quickly. But my first book was called Brands of Faith. And it was the first book to look at the intersection between religion and marketing, specifically looking at religion as a product and something to be sold. And so that started this trajectory to get to where I am now and writing a book like Hoodwinked, which looks specifically at the very important ways that marketing and cults actually parallel one another. It was really fascinating.
I wonder if we might go back in time then to those days, those initial days. What was it that sparked your interest in religion as product and the way in which that product is marketed?
Sure. This is going to go into my background a bit. So I've been interested in religion since I'm 13, and I won't tell you how old, but it's many, many decades of being interested in religion. I've also been interested in cults, actually. I first read my first book about cults when I was 13 years old. And it's something that I have always been really interested in, both as a practitioner and as an area of study. And so when I worked in the industry, I used to work in advertising and marketing. And I worked at a company called Backer Spielvogel Bates. I worked on the Miller beer business. I worked on Dole Foods. I worked on Colombian coffee. But I always really wanted to work in entertainment. I actually started my career as an actress. My undergraduate degree is in theater. But I wanted to work in entertainment, and so then I switched over and I worked at VH1, which is part of MTV Networks, working in advertising and marketing, and then I worked at NBC. And while I was at NBC, I started seeing a lot of research, because as a marketer, you look at research, you look at tons and tons of research to understand why people are buying certain things, what the trends are, and so on. And I was seeing more and more information about how unhappy people were. And how also at the same time religion was starting to decline. And I'm not necessarily saying that those two things are fundamentally correlated with one another, but it was something that I was seeing. I also was at a point where I was thinking, when I'm not sure I want to do this for the rest of my life, and I also felt like this can't be the best use of my energy on the planet to try and get people to watch more television. I mean, that can't be what I'm here for. And so those two things have moved along together on the same trajectory. And so when I decided so I had an MBA when I started working in the industry. But then when I decided to get a PhD, I thought, oh, this is an opportunity for me to really look at where these two things that I really am interested start to intersect. And so like I said, I wrote about policy as my dissertation, but I always was researching religion. So when you get a PhD, one of the things you have to do is what they call a literature review, which means that you have to look at everything that's been written, or as much as possible that has been written in the area. And when I went back to school, I was almost 40 years old, and I knew it would take me a tremendous amount of time to get up to speed on the literature. So I ended up doing that after I graduated. And so I started initially looking at things like televangelists, because there's so much connection between what they do in marketing, because unlike your neighborhood church, a televangelist has to sell themselves because they have to get you to give them money in order for them to be able to continue to appear on television. And so that was sort of an inroad into that. What also happened at the same time was the Passion of the Christ. And so Mel Gibson was doing an amazing amount of marketing around that, both things that people would see and things that people might not see. So for instance, one of the things that he did was record messages to go on religious leaders' voicemails. They would get a voicemail. Remember when people had voicemail? They would call them and they would get a message from Mel Gibson. And that was huge for them. That was a great sales tool for them. They also bought out movie theaters for churches to bring their entire congregation. And so that was a way for people that was an important marketing tool for them. What people may not know about book sales, and this is key, particularly in the religious realm, is that The Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren, one of the reasons why that book sold so well is that it's, I believe, 40 days of exercises. And that book was sold into churches. And so the churches ran the program of the purpose-driven life. So they got a discount by buying all those books. And then that book, the last time I looked, was the second highest ranked best-selling nonfiction book after the Bible. So talk about marketing. And then another aspect I was looking at was what's known as the secularization theory, which is the idea of as a society becomes more secular, it becomes less religious. Now, that didn't happen in the United States. It's one of the few places where it didn't happen. And the reason why is because we don't have a required faith that is mandated by the government, but rather religions have always had to fight against each other. They've always had to vie against one another, and they use marketing in order to be able to do that. One of the ways that I looked at the secularization theory is I compared Joel Osteen, who is the pastor of the Lakewood Church, which is the largest megachurch in the United States, against Oprah Winfrey. And so he was the sacred becoming secular, because if you look at his books are very, they may mention Jesus or God a little bit, but they're really self-helpy kinds of books. And the same thing for his television show. He barely mentions God or Jesus until the very end of the show, where he does an altar call. On the other hand, at the time I wrote the book, which was 2008, was Oprah Winfrey was at her height. And when she talked about her show, when people appeared on her show, she talked about it as their testimony, right? Which is a very religious term. She, Eckhart Tolle was on. She, Marianne Williamson, all these sort of spiritual folks that she brought on, and was seeding that into what was, a secular realm. And so what you have is not the elimination of the sacred, but sort of this blending of how it begins to happen, and it becomes married into a capitalist or consumer context.
So I can see, I think, why religion, I think you've explained why a religion or religious group would begin to draw upon secular marketing strategies to increase its viewership and following, etc. What is the motivation? I mean, it's in a way maybe it's a little obvious, but I'm curious if you have an insight in what the motivation is for a secular organization, and this is a lot of what Hoodwinked is about actually, to start to pull on religious tones or religious themes in their, like Oprah, for example, or others in their marketing.
Well, I think Oprah is an outlier because she embodies that, and that's it, sort of infuses everything that she does. But what motivated me to write Hoodwinked, let me tell you the story of where this idea came from, and I think this will get to answering your question. It was the middle of COVID. I would go downstairs and get on my elliptical, and every day I was watching something new. And at the time, I was watching the documentary series The Vow on HBO, which was about the NXIVM cult. And at the same time, I was watching Lula Rich, which was the documentary series. It was on Amazon that was about LuLaRoe, which is a multi-level marketing company. And I'm start watching these two things side by side, and I am like, this is the same thing. This is the same thing, whether or not you're talking about a cult or you're talking about a multi-level marketing company. These are the same things. Now, as I continued my research, I found out I was not the first person to discover this, but I then realized that I knew enough about brand communities and brand cults from other research I had done to begin to think of how is this infusing not just multi-level marketing, but other areas of consumer culture. And so when I began to think about it, I had looked at years ago brand cults. And if you think about a brand cult, probably one of the most obvious ones people think about is Apple, right? Because people who are Apple consumers are Apple consumers. Now, some of that is their own passion for it. Some of it is what the company does to create a walled garden. So it makes it very difficult for you to be able to leave once you've bought into their products. But, people, mourned incredibly when Steve Jobs died. It was like a saint had disappeared. And so it was really disproportionate in relationship to what is a consumer product, right? Consumer products should be nothing other than transactional. I go to the store, I buy the product, I take it home, I use it, done. That's it. But that's not how we think about products anymore. They're brands, and the brands are made up of some kind of iconography, right? Could be a cross or it could be a swoosh. And then the mythology behind that brand. So for something like Apple, right? It's think different. It's that if you use this, that you are somehow different, you are better, you are more cutting edge. And so it's what that brand says about you. So as people didn't connect their identity to things like a faith, like a job, right? Because people don't work for places like IBM for 30 years anymore. I say that to my students, that people worked for the same company for 30 years and their brains explode. Like they can't imagine working for a company for more than a couple of years. Or having a relationship in terms of our family name. And that doesn't exist anymore. And so people are turn to the consumer marketplace for identity markers. So it could be Apple, it could be Nike, it could be Prius. God help us, it could be Tesla, right? But it's all of those things that define us to ourselves and to the rest of the world about who we are. And it used to be that there were a handful of brands. There was Apple, Harley Davidson was another one. Actually, Oprah was a brand, right? A brand cult. But now it's expanded much further. And the argument that I make in the book for that is because of digital technology, because of how we engage with one another and how that technology makes us feel. We become more engaged with these brands because we come at them from a more vulnerable state. Do you want me to keep going here? Because I can, or do you want to break?
On a break.
Yeah, keep going. No, because I'm used to television where they want you to talk for like 2 minutes, 2 minutes too, and it's like,
Well,
stop.
yeah. Well, maybe we should practice what we preach and do some sort of cult advertising right now.
But
Hoodwinked. Hoodwinked is the book for those who know better than to be taken in by those cult marketers. Buy
okay.
Hoodwinked and express your independence and free-thinking style by Professor Mara Einstein. There we go. Now we've done it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so now I feel
Practical application.
Always be marketing. That's what we learn. Always be marketing. But when we think about social media spaces and how people engage with advertising now, it's very different than when people watch television. If you're watching television, you're sitting back, you're in your living room, a TV is across the room from you, you may be engaging with other people at the same time. And the advertising that's being sent to you is being sent based on some assumptions about who they believe is watching that particular content. So, but the same thing is not true in the digital spaces, right? Because they can have so much information about all of us, and they can send more specific advertising, targeted advertising to you. Whole nother story about how effective or not effective that is, but that's a whole nother episode. In terms of what it does for us emotionally, and that's a key thing that I talk about in the book, is that the more time we spend with social media, the more anxious we become. And the technology is specifically designed to do that. You can think about this in terms of rage farming, right? You watch somebody online, they get very upset, they're angry, they're ratcheted to a level that really doesn't make sense. But the reason for that is that it has engagement. It increases engagement. And so the more angry a post is, the more anxious we become about it, we get tied into what people are presenting to us. There's also no stopping point for social media. If you watch a movie, the movie has an endpoint. You're done, you walk away. A book, you finish reading the book, you close the book, you're done, you walk away. There's no endpoint for social media. So we just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And if people remember back to the last Trump administration, doom scrolling was a real thing for people. And what happens is as we become more anxious, we become more vulnerable to messages. Whether it's MAGA or whether it's Apple, we become open to and more vulnerable to this kind of messaging. And so we need release. We need release from the anxiety. So that release either happens by spending more time on social media, which doesn't make any sense, or we go out and go shopping, right? Because when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. And so instead of separating from this and saying, no, I don't need all this information, I don't need to buy all of these things, we get caught in this anxiety, purchase anxiety, doom scrolling anxiety, purchase loop. And so one of the things that I argue in the book is that we don't live in an attention economy, which is what economists say. We live in an anxiety economy, because it's not just enough for marketers to have our attention. It's that marketers want us to be anxious so that we will stay plugged in. And of course, there's intermittent rewards, and I'm sure people know about this, the idea that the way that the social media spaces work is also to sometimes reward you and sometimes not reward you. And it works the same way as a Las Vegas slot machine. And that too keeps you coming back for more. I know it sounds so depressing, but I mean, what's interesting though, what I think is really interesting right now is to watch what's going on with TikTok and people trying to figure out whether or not it's going to go away. And what I'm seeing more and more people saying is, if this goes away, I'm just going to shut out of social media and I'm going to go read a book and I'm going to go spend more time with my family and all this. Now, whether or not that happens, we'll wait and see. But there's enough going on in terms of the introduction of AI into social media spaces. And I just read something about their eliminating censorship on meta sites. I think it's going to become more and more of a dumpster fire. And if people feel like that, then they will find some other way to engage with people and to find the news and information that they need.
So, when we think about marketing, when I think about the history of marketing, and I think about this identity marketing, in other words, buy this to be the kind of person who, that kind of a line of reasoning. I think of Edward Bernays, right? Famous Torches of Freedom, his they say revolutionary marketing campaign, smoke cigarettes as an expression of freedom, or female freedom, in fact, it was that campaign. Then I also think of religion. And religion also has maybe it's a bug, maybe it's a feature. Thinking it's perhaps a feature of religion. It also has a lot to say about identity. If I become a member of religion, in a way, it can be a portal to an identity transformation, something I assume or something I bring about, perhaps through ritual and practice and participation in community, etc. I become a different person. That's one of the appeals. The soteriological, as they say, appeal of religion is that I can get relief from myself. I can be someone else, or I can get enlightened, or whatever the case may be. I'm curious about two things. First of all, you said you are interested in religion from a practitioner's point of view. I'm very curious about that. What your religious practice history has been. And secondly, what do you think about marketing and religion as a pairing? Is religion fundamentally a kind of a marketing? Is that part of what religion's all about? Does it even perhaps predate Bernays, this sort of idea of identity marketing? I sometimes wonder if that may be the case.
No. Well, I wrote another book called Selling the Sacred, which is actually, I co-edited it with a colleague of mine who is a religion scholar at Northwestern, Sarah McFarlane Taylor. And we looked at various ways that marketing and religion intersect. And we looked at things like CrossFit, and we looked at multi-level marketing, but we also looked at like early television evangelists. And one of the things that we talk about actually in the introduction of the book is that there was church merch in the Middle Ages. So this idea of marketing and religion being new, it's not new. What's different now, and one of the things that I've written a lot about, is this difference between being attained and ascribed, right? Ascribed, these are sociology terms, ascribed being what is the faith that you were raised with. And so, probably before the introduction of mass media, if you were raised in the Baptist family, you were going to the Baptist church. And if you, that's what you were doing. But one of the things that happened with the introduction of radio was that people could begin to listen to sermons of different faiths. And so it was an opportunity for them to be able to learn about what was going on in the church down the street without having to actually walk into the church. Because if you walked into the front of the church, people saw you do that on Sunday morning, and it was going to be on Sunday morning. And that was a much bigger statement than for you to be able to sit at home and hear what was going on. The same thing is true and begins to expand as you have changes in media spaces, which is if you can start to watch different televangelists and listen to radio, and then as it expands into social media spaces, you can begin to do what's known as cafeteria religion, pick a little bit of this and a little bit of that and bring it all together to something that works for you as your spiritual practice. And so we can choose the religion that we want, and you can combine religion. There's plenty of Jew-boos around, Jewish Buddhists around. So it isn't that you are locked into a faith system, which used to be the case, 100 years ago. Because I'm going to be careful here because I'm not a scholar of religion, right? I'm a marketing scholar. I'm a marketing scholar, so I'm going to be careful when I step into territory that starts to ask about the history of religion, because that's not my specialty. So you can ask the question, but I can't promise I'm going to be able to answer it.
Right, that's fine. Okay, and let's pivot then slightly. You mentioned that one of the reasons you became interested in this intersection of religion and marketing in your PhD years, you expressed that, was that you were interested in religion as a practitioner. So I'm curious if you might say a little bit about that side of things, your religious practice, so to speak, and why it is that led to your interest in this particular subject.
Sure. It's so funny because nobody's ever asked me that question. I was raised Jewish. I was bat mitzvahed. I was raised in a Reconstructionist temple, which is somewhere between Reform and conservative. But we were not particularly religious. My father was not religious. And I started meditating, I guess, when I was 13, and I have meditated on and off for many, 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 many years. It gets to be difficult at times when you have a little baby at home to find time to do that, but you do what you do. I got very involved in the New Age, probably in my teens and early 20s. I went to the Open Center in New York and the place up in Rhinebeck, whatever that is. I was there like several weekends a year. I was a big follower of Marianne Williamson for a long time. I won't say it was a you know what, because she threatened to sue me when I've said that before. But if you're in enough pain, you look for things that you think will have an answer for you. And at that particular point in time in my life, she was kind of it for me. And then I think after that, I got fairly disillusioned about religion, but I was always, I remained interested in sort of New Age philosophies. I'm also, just because of what I do, I needed to understand other faith practices. I studied evangelicals for a long time, and that was just because I was studying megachurches. And so what's really interesting is to be a Jew studying evangelicals. They want to convert you all the time because they think you're going to hell. And so I always entered those spaces being really specific about the fact that I was there as a researcher and not somebody who was interested in being converted. And now I think of myself as really a cultural Jew more than anything else. And I'm not sure where my practice is going to go now.
That's very interesting. I've interviewed a couple of times on here one of the main founders of the Open Center, Ralph White.
I used to live in the East Village, so I used to walk over there all the time. I took so many classes. Past life and meditation and all that kind of stuff. And look, I think all of it's great. I think all of it's great. I probably still not even consciously, still use a lot of the things that I learned from my days of being there.
When you look back at those years with the expertise you have now, one of the things that, I'm not a marketing expert. You are, of course, but one of the things I hear about marketing anyway is that you should identify your customer avatar, and try to map out the process that the customer goes from first contact to buying and that sort of thing. So if you look back at yourself and sort of analyze yourself as a lead, what do you think from a marketing strategy point of view, what operated on you and moved you deeper into that world?
I think, and it actually, if I take the example of someone like Marianne Williamson, because she was sort of similar to Joel Osteen in a way, is I used to see her on like late night cable access television. And there was nothing really salesy about it. And that's the same thing that Joel Osteen does. It's very polished, but it doesn't feel polished. And it's not attacking you with a specific sales message. And so when we work in marketing, we talk about the marketing funnel. And the top of the funnel is the creation of awareness. And so typically that's done through advertising, but in the religious realm, it's usually done through, somebody brings somebody to a church, or somebody, you see something on television, and then it goes from awareness to consideration. Oh, this is something that I might do, and compare it to other things. Then it's called conversion. Even in marketing, the step is called conversion. It's when people actually buy the product. And then the last step is loyalty. But now we talk about loyalty as marketing evangelism. And so this parallel between marketing and religion it's so fundamental. I mean, to me now, it's just so obvious. And in work that I've done with churches and religious groups in the past, if I say marketing, they're like, no, we don't, that's not what we do. We don't do marketing. But if I say evangelizing, they're like, oh yeah, no, yeah, we get it. That, it's just a little switch of the word. But the process of what's being done is the same thing. So it starts with awareness. So the awareness being seeing someone on television can, move somebody to the next step. And part of moving someone to the next step, then was getting me to go see her in person. And then you engage with other people. Now, this is a key part to both religious groups and marketers now, is creating community. Because what you want to do is make it so that people aren't just leaving the product, they're leaving the community and the people that surround the product, and becomes much harder to leave. So you think about this in terms of a megachurch, for instance. It's not that I'm no longer going to see Rick Warren be a pastor. It's that I'm leaving Susie and Johnny and all of these people I connected with through my spiritual relationship with them. And the same thing is true in terms of brands. A great example is Nutella. I know it's crazy, but Nutella, people are crazy about it. They love that. And it wasn't the brand that created World Nutella Day. It was the fans that created that. And in fact, the brand kept tearing it down websites that they created. I mean, now we think about that and we think it's nuts. But when this happened, they were like, no, they wanted to control the brand. Not anymore. That's no longer the case. They want people to connect themselves to the brand as much as possible, and make it as much of their personality as possible. Some of this is that people do everything they can to avoid advertising, whether it's paying a subscription for their content, if it's using a remote control so they skip the advertising if they've used a DVR, whatever it is. You watch YouTube, the first thing you do is hit the skip button, right? Because you don't want to engage with it. Well, if people are doing everything they can not to engage with advertising, and advertisers are concerned about whether or not people are ever going to see their messages, then the thing they need to do is make that brand so important to the person's life that they can't extricate it from themselves. And the way to do that is make sure that they connect to the brand in as many ways as possible, including through brand communities, which can be kept together either by consumers themselves, but is also often facilitated by the brands themselves. And so then you get the person to the point of conversion, purchasing, and then you get the emails. And while people think, digital advertising is really effective, email marketing is the most effective marketing right now. And that's why you get those emails. As soon as you buy something, your email box gets flooded with all kinds of content from those people. And that's why. And the expectation and the hope is that you will then get on social media and tell all your friends about how wonderful the product is, and then they become part of the group and the cult and so on.
So what was the funnel then for you with Marianne Williamson? First of all, you saw her on late night TV, and then...
Right. And then she used to come to New York once a month. And so I used to go see her at Town Hall once a month, and I bought all the cassettes and I bought her books. And, so I went from awareness to consideration pretty quickly. And I did that for years, I think. And then would talk to other people about that. Now, this is pre-social media. So, so the people that I talked to were people that I met there, but also my friends and so on, tried to get them engaged as well. I don't think I converted anybody. I don't think I converted anybody, though. It was just me. I also traveled with her. There's a company where you can do spiritual travel. And I went on one of those trips with her to England and Ireland, I think. Right. So I met her more close up and personal as well.
Oh, the sort of chalice well, that sort of thing.
Um, this was, I forget what the name of the company was, but it was, maybe 30 people on a trip, and you go from, um,
Like
Stonehenge
Stonehenge, yeah.
to whatever.
Yeah.
And you have a local guide that tells you all the things about it, but then she also, leads a meditation or
Right,
whatever.
right. Yeah, the reason I said chalice well is in Glastonbury, which is quite near
Uh-huh,
Stonehenge. There's
uh-huh.
a famous well that all the groups go to and,
Yeah, yeah,
meditate by the well,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. What are some of the phases or thresholds that one passes through? Maybe the first bit of money you pay is one thing.
Mm.
Or what else might it be? What are some of the thresholds that you might be able to detect about yourself that you're going deeper into
Mm.
into a group?
Well, if we go through the process, like if we talk about this from the cult perspective, right? If we talk about the 9 steps of what cults do to get you involved, I'm going to parallel it both in terms of religion and in terms of marketing. So the first step in the process is to get people when they are at their most vulnerable. And so we see this in churches, for instance, when they find out that you've just had a divorce or you are bereaved, um, or with cults, they particularly like to go after students when they first go to college campuses because they have no support group. They don't have people they can talk to and sort of decompress about the information that's being given to them. So that's a very fertile ground for cults to find people. There's a documentary I highly recommend to people called People You May Know. And it talks about the way that churches and political groups have come together to use data to find these vulnerable people and to get them into churches. And I'll leave it at that in terms of where we are in terms of that. Now, advertising and marketing has always been about getting people at their most vulnerable, because advertising and marketing won't tell you that you're fabulous just the way you are, or you would never go out and buy their product, right? So they've got to tell you that there's something wrong with you. You're too fat, you're too thin, your hair's too thin, you'll never get the guy or the girl or whatever it is. But if you use my product, then your whole life is going to be better. So that's sort of the first step in the process, whether you're talking about a religious group or whether you're talking about marketing. The second part is to lure people in with deception. And what I mean by that is with cults, they don't tell you right away who they are, right? And take the Nexium cult as a great example. They presented themselves as a organization that was going to teach you how to be more successful professionally. They weren't telling you that they were going to pull you into this cult. And that's what, in the same, LuLaRoe, multi-level marketing, does the same thing. We're going to give you an easy way for you to make a whole lot of money, and you don't have to work very hard in order to be able to do that. And then you find out that you can't find your way out. And that one's a really good one when it comes to community, because they suck you into the community very quickly when it comes to that. Religion, the same thing. you come to a church and the first thing, or a synagogue or a mosque, right? The first thing they want to do is surround you with people, they have sessions for new groups, new members of the church here, meet other new members, all of that sort of thing. And so it's to get you engaged with people as soon as possible. That's what I was talking about before in terms of creating community. The sooner people can get you locked into other people in the group, the sooner it is that it becomes harder for you to leave. Another group with this, ISKCON, formerly Hare Krishnas, what they do a lot now is offer free yoga and dinners around college campuses. And then, and college students like nothing better than free food. And so what happens is that they get sucked into coming back to and taking yoga classes and so on until they get pulled into the cult. And then the next part of this is what's known as upselling. Once you begin to see that people are interested in what you are talking about, you get them to buy into more and more of this. So one of the examples that I talk about in the book is I spent 2 years researching the Kabbalah Center. And so if you go to the Kabbalah Center, and you don't have to be Jewish, talk about marketing. You want to talk about a group that knows how to market themselves. It's the Kabbalah Center. But if you take a class with the Kabbalah Center, an intro class entitles you to a one-on-one session with the teacher. And so you think, great, wow, they'll train me into what this Kabbalah stuff is all about. No, that is a hard sell session where they're trying to get you to buy the Zohar, and not one copy. Well, it's actually 26 books. Not one set of the Zohar, but 2 sets of the Zohar. So you have one at home and one at your office, and they cost $400+. And it was, it's really hard sell. So that becomes the next process. So because let's see how much more we can pull you in. And again, it's exactly the point that you were making, which is once you open your wallet, right, you've made the commitment to start spending money. So it's not, it's the beginning of spending time is a first step, and then the second step becomes the opening up your wallet and spending more money. Then the next thing that happens is love bombing. And we see this in social media space. This is a great example of where to see this, is once you start engaging with an influencer, for instance, they will start to tell you, if you really do this, they will start to tell you how great you are, and oh, thank you. And if they do a live, oh, Susie, it's great to see you. Oh, Bob, yeah, thanks for coming by, right? And so they acknowledge people, so those people feel connected. And if we want to think about this as, in terms of something like MAGA, they specifically targeted disenfranchised baby boomers. Baby boomers who had seen marketed in the rest of the world, oh, everybody's getting and I'm not. And so I'm really pissed off about this. And so let me find and let me see this group that agrees with me in terms of this. And they all begin to feed on each other. And it becomes this great big love session about how we all agree about this one idea. What happens after that is tough love. Now, this doesn't happen all the time in marketing spaces, but certainly happens in religious spaces, which is if you show signs of beginning to leave, they will try and do things to suck you back in. Kabbalah Center is actually another good example of this. If you said something like, I really can't afford another class, you don't really want this. You don't care about your spiritual life as much as you say you do. If you did, you would find a way to pay for it, right? If anybody says anything like that to you, hit the door faster than anything you could possibly imagine, because nobody should say that to you, and nor should your spirituality be based on how much money you can pay in order to be able to achieve it. I mean, that's just rot. That's just absolute rot. One of the things that cults do in terms of tough love also is these more extreme indoctrination practices in terms of denying people sleep, denying people food. You're not going to see a brand do that kind of thing. But they will try and make it difficult for you to be able to leave. The other thing that happens, and we are starting to see this certainly in digital spaces, is the creation of in and out groups. When one of the ways that cults keep people locked in is by not allowing them to have engagement with people outside the group who are going to denounce the group. And so what happens in social media spaces is that we get separated into information silos. And as soon as we start seeing someone who disagrees with us, we denounce them. We don't want to hear about it, right? And so we've seen this in terms of, broadly Fox News versus, something like MSNBC, but in social media spaces too, it's one platform is for liberals and another is for conservatives. There's spaces where you see ex-evangelicals and ex-Mormons, and other places where the Christian right is ruling. And so we have less spaces where we engage with each other and less spaces where we allow ourselves to question some of our belief systems. And that becomes very dangerous, whether you're talking about a brand or whether you're talking about a religious system, because you should always be able to question. Always, 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 you should be able to question. And when somebody shuts that down, that's a problem. Then people get into the core beliefs, where they actually tell you what their belief system is. And by that time, most people have been so sucked into the process, right? So you've opened your heart, you've opened your mind, you've opened your spirit, you've opened your pocketbook, and then they tell you, oh no, that's not who we really are. This is what we really believe. And it becomes really hard to leave. And then the last part of that is severe repercussions for leaving. So that it's not just, as I said before, it's not just about leaving the product. It's not just about leaving the belief system. It's about leaving everything else that you know. What's also true, particularly of cults, is they are very litigious. And so it becomes really hard to leave because they threaten to sue you, but also what a lot of cults do is get very personal, very detrimental information about you that they threaten to release if you say you will leave. That was one of the things that NXIVM did that was really reprehensible. They did a lot of things that were reprehensible, but that one was really awful.
American evangelicalism has a whole genre of books and trainings about evangelism. Mm-hmm. And of course they would, because if you're a sincere evangelical Christian, it's not that you necessarily want to trick people into your group so you can sort of parasitize them in some sort of evil cultish way necessarily. I think your average evangelical Christian, maybe even your average pastor, just really believes that it's the right thing. And the analogy that's often used in evangelical Christendom, as you well know, is if a house is on fire, someone's house is on fire, what would you do? Would you just look at them and think, well, I don't want to interfere with their life? You'd run in there and you grab them and you say, your house is on fire. Quickly, get out of your house. It's burning down. And so that's the conundrum that an evangelical Christian and perhaps to some extent, Buddhist or whatever the case may be, is in. They feel they have the truth. The consequences are not only inconvenient, but perhaps eternal, hell, whatever the case may be. And it's really important that they want to tell you all about it. And so there's this genre of evangelical literature, how to proselytize. Things like how to be a friend. Just be a friend to your neighbor and just be a good example and be open. And then when they ask a question, here's how you present it, etc., etc. Don't overdo it, but reel them in gradually and so on. And equally, if you have a product you want to sell, religious or otherwise, there's a sense in which you want people to know about it. But let's say you don't want to be shady about it. Let's say you're a religious person and you really believe in the teachings of the Buddha or the teachings of Jesus or something like that, and you want to make people aware of it. You want to market, but you don't want to be shady about it. You don't want to do the bait and switch that you described there, that culture. You don't want to do love bombing and tough love and all this sort of stuff. You don't want to manipulate people or trick people into your religion, but you want to make it known. This is, I think, a big conundrum for religious people. You mentioned in your book also that religions tend to be quite poor at marketing, relatively speaking. And I think partly it's that's moral conflict. It's like, how far do we go to push the buttons of persuasion? What sort of things ought a religious group avoid if it doesn't want to become a cult in its marketing, at least, but still be effective?
Well, one of the things because this was sort of the first thing I thought of when you started telling this story, is the recent He Gets Us campaign. Do you know the He Gets Us campaign? It's a campaign that has been going on for about 3 years. It's done with black and white photography, and it looks like it's sort of Black Lives Matter, very left wing, all of this kind of stuff. But He Gets Us. It is some of the most deceptive advertising out there, and He Gets Us being Jesus. Okay. And so this is a 3-year campaign. It's $1 billion campaign. It is connected to an organization called Barna and Gloo, GLOO, which is a religious data mining company. And I've done a lot of TikToks on that if anybody's interested in the whole story behind this and who Gloo is and so on. But this is backed by the Koch brothers. This is connected to the Alpha Course, and the Alpha Course is a 10-week course where you have dinner and a movie, right? And you learn about the faith, and it's about teaching baby evangelicals how to be evangelicals. It's very flashy. It's highly produced. It's, people are like, oh, who's doing this? And what's really interesting is they put it on during sportscasts, which is going to be primarily men. So, women watch, but it's still primarily men that are watching Monday Night Football. And so advertisers will pay a lot of money to be on there because they want to get in front of men. I still am not 100% sure what this campaign was all about, other than to trick people in sort of the culty kind of way to become part of evangelical churches. If you want to know exactly what not to do, that's the example of what you don't do. What we also know from Mormons is that sending people on a 2-year missionary trip doesn't work. They know it doesn't work. It's more of a training thing for people to learn how to talk and profess their faith. And if you also want to find a group who has been very dissatisfied with their upbringing, take a look at the ex-Mormon groups that are online, and they're a very vocal, very articulate group. I think the best thing for someone or a church in order to be able to talk about who they are in terms of marketing is live it, right? I think that's the biggest issue that people have. And even evangelicals that I've interviewed for books in the past, they get upset about what's going on in evangelicalism now. I still remember, and this was years ago, I interviewed a woman who grew up as an evangelical, and she was still part of the church, but she said what made her so angry now was that part of being an evangelical was living the faith. And it wasn't just about saying, Jesus is my wingman, which is what people say now, but it was about walking the walk. It was about doing the good works. And so when you have a church like Lakewood that isn't available and isn't feeding people and isn't helping people when Houston floods, then that's not doing the work of what caring for each other is all about. And I think for myself, the one guiding principle of Judaism that has always stuck with me, and I'm sure this isn't just Judaism, is that we are called on to leave the world a better place than when we found it. That's a fundamental teaching. And so my work that I do isn't, yeah, great. I would love you to buy my book. But the reason why I'm on places like TikTok is I know that a lot of people won't be able to do that. And I think it's really important for people to understand how they are being manipulated by a capitalist system that is detrimental to them, their mental health, and the planet. And that's the thing that gets me up and going every day. And that's tied to my faith as a Jew.
What would you avoid marketing-wise as shady? What would be a line you wouldn't want to
Oh,
cross? You want to get it out there.
mhm.
You want to tell people about it. You really believe it's important and it's going to help people. Okay, so that's sort of the your average evangelical Christian, or or local Buddhist or whatever. I expect is pretty much the same. What
Mhm.
would you avoid marketing-wise that you'd say, that's a bit culty, that's a bit shady,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
going to cross
yeah,
that line?
yeah, yeah. I think some of that is what I was talking about, again, in terms of the Kabbalah Center, but I would also say it about Rick Warren, and I'd say it about Joel Osteen and some of the rest, not cults, but mega churches, and yeah, kind of culty. One, if people ask you for money, if people are asking you for money and endlessly asking you for money. Now, even if you look at something like the Mormon Church, people were required to tithe, and then they found out where their money was being spent, and it wasn't being spent to, you know, feed people and clothe people and so on and so forth. So, if somebody asks you for money, number one, or if they ask you for money and you decide to give it, that there is utter transparency about where that money is going and what that money is being used for. Because sometimes an organization can make better inroads in terms of helping people than an individual can. And, to that I would say, okay, great. If some belief system offers you that they have the answer to everything. Like they have a one overriding worldview that answers all of life's questions, run. That's a hard no. And that is a great example of that. Again, MAGA. Um, you know, we're going to get rid of democracy and we'll take over the world and everything's fine. No, that's a no. So sorry. There goes the dog. Be concerned about charismatic leaders. Let her finish barking. Be concerned about charismatic leaders. They are, it's not, and this is from Jaja Lalich, who is one of the leading cult experts. She talks about charisma, and charisma isn't inherent in a person. Charisma is based on what we imbue into the person. So that's that's got to be a personal check, right? How am I relating to this person and what kind of power am I giving this person over me? So that would be another thing to look for. I had a third one: money, power, connection, worldview. I think those are the key things. If I think of something else, I'll let you know.
Let's say you're advising, let's take it out of this context, a Buddhist group. They are a community Buddhist center of some type, and they want to market. They need to keep the lights on. How should they have a charismatic leader, perhaps someone who's got a bit of something. How can a religious group ethically market? How do they do
Yes,
it?
yes. It goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the funnel, which is any group can ethically create awareness for themselves. And then it becomes up to the person who finds out about you as to whether or not they want to engage with you and move further down the funnel. And so there's no reason why why a Buddhist group or any other group, can't get online or put up a billboard or put something outside their church and get people involved with who they are and make them aware. Have a radio show, do a podcast, all of that stuff is good. All of that stuff is legit. All of that is helpful and informative, and that's all positive stuff. That's up at the top of the funnel. That's where the vast majority of marketing happens, is the top of the funnel, because what you're trying to do up there is to find the people who are going to be most served by your product, and you want to talk about it that way. I mean, that's one of the things we haven't talked about, is the target audience. Who is the target audience for these products, religious or otherwise? Usually when we're talking about religion, more women than men, which is why I made the comment about, he gets us being promoted to men. It's kind of an interesting fact. But once people begin to hear about what a product is, they can make a decision for themselves as to whether or not this solves a problem, right? Because what I talk about when I teach advertising and marketing solves a business problem for the business, right? They need more people, they need more followers, they need to sell more product, all of that. But then they also need to find out who their target audience is. Who is it that is going to be best served? And this is the difference between sales and marketing. Sales is, I have this pen and I just made a bucket ton of them and I have warehouses full of these pens. And I'm going to say, you, Steve, you need to buy this pen. And then that's how I'm going to do it. The difference is between selling and marketing is I go to you and I say, Steve, what is it exactly that you want? What is it that you need in terms of a belief system that will serve you, that will be integrated into your life, that will help you to do all of the things that you want to do in relationship to that? And then you build that based on that information that you get from your consumers. That was one of the things that Rick Warren did that was so brilliant, right? Is he did that consumer research. And it wasn't that he changed the fundamental faith. He didn't change the Bible. He changed everything else that was around it. And so early on, what we talked about is what is marketing? Most people, when they think of marketing, is they think of advertising or promotion. That's just one aspect of marketing. Anyone who's taken a basic advertising class, marketing class, knows it's the 4 Ps. It's product, price, place, and promotion. And so what someone like Rick Warren did for the religion is keep the base of the product, but then change to the packaging. Right. So the packaging of the services was recreated in order to be able to draw more people into the faith. And I don't see anything wrong with that. If that's what gets more people in the door, that's fine. The problem is what is the product that you're giving to them once they're there? And then consumers can decide, yes, this product does what they said it was going to do, or it doesn't. And then what often happens with mega churches is then they go out the back door because they didn't get what they thought they were going to get when they walked in the front door. So there's definitely ways to do it ethically. The issue is to be honest from the get-go about the product and the services that you were providing. That's the key difference.
That's very interesting. Thank you. I wonder, have you ever heard the term stealth Buddhism?
I've heard of stealth marketing. I haven't heard of stealth Buddhism.
Stealth Buddhism is something that's sometimes leveled at secular mindfulness initiatives, like mindfulness-based stress reduction and other things like that. And the idea is that it's a little bit like what you described actually before. We're going to teach you how to reduce your stress, or we're going to teach you how to manage your anxiety.
Yeah.
Or improve your performance at work, or whatever the case is. And we teach you that. And along the way, we're going to mention there's going to be some sort of Buddhist doctrines, let's say, that feed into that. And if you want to get deeper beyond just the superficial life enhancing effects of meditation, then you're starting to look at the soteriological aspect of it. You're starting to look at concepts such as samsara, problematizing existence or life. There's a problem here, there's a solution here. oh, there's a problem here, there's a cause to that problem, and there's a way out of it, and we have our 8-step program. But it's actually 8 steps. I mean, that's the thing.
Right,
It's the
right.
Eightfold Path to getting out of it. It's a nice, persuasive marketing package in a sense. So stealth Buddhism is the accusation that's sometimes leveled at secular mindfulness, which goes into schools and prisons and things like that. That it's a sort of stealth Buddhism in a sense, because it's based on a worldview that's not disclosed up front. Would you say that, does that go into the shadier side of marketing? Is that a little bit of an orange flag?
Well, there's a scholar who does work in this area, Jeff Wilson. I don't know if you know his work. I think it's either American Mindfulness or Mindfulness America. I forget what the name of his book is. But he talks about this, and what he's been seeing now is as these Buddhist practices move further and further into corporate America, what he's seeing is that it's not about reducing stress, it's about increasing productivity. And so that's where you get the sort of bait and switch going on in terms of introducing these belief systems into corporate spaces. Now, it's also can be done in different ways. There's some places that mandate it. Like you have to do, I think it's like in the month of February, people are given Fitbits and and they have to do a certain amount of exercise, but they also have to do meditation, and they get the Calm app. And so all of this sort of thing. So I think if it's done to introduce people to a practice and then they want to move further along themselves, again, that's the awareness to the consideration set. I think that's fine. I think it's when the corporate marketers are trying to save some, or the corporations are trying to save some money on healthcare benefits, that it starts to be a little questionable in terms of practices. I don't think it's bad to teach it to kids. I think it's, because there isn't going to be I don't think there's an ulterior motive, or teenagers. There's no ulterior motive there, or shouldn't be. There are corporations that do use faith as a way to improve worker productivity, and not because they want to help their workers have better mental health / take on a spiritual practice. Nor can they really. A company can't say, "Oh, I want you to become a Buddhist." I mean, that's never going to fly.
I mean, I suppose it's plausible that a company might think that we want to take care of our workers so that they are happier, healthier, and more productive. I mean, maybe those two things can align. It might be possible.
If there's a company like Timberland would be, or Patagonia, or I don't know, MAC Cosmetics. If a company like that did it, I would think that it's probably legit. If it's Coca-Cola, you'd have to persuade me a bit more. Or P&G.
And what about the entities that are teaching it? I mean, they're of course marketing their product as meditation for stress reduction, or peak performance, or something like that, based on, say, religious principles. So what I'm hearing you say is, so long as it's disclosed that we've kind of trolled various contemplative systems, and we've also looked at I think this is necessary to include now as well, the studies have shown appeal to that side of authority too, potential research and whatnot, and we've put together an expertly curated package for attentional training that's going to help your employees be both more productive at work and happier, healthier, and people. We're not going to tell them about the Buddhism, though. We're not going to tell them about that.
Right.
We're just going to teach them the attentional skills. And of course, if they want to find out more, we can let them know that life is suffering, and that they need to end their endless rounds of reincarnation and stuff. Is that getting into the amber territory or not really? I'm trying to find the difference between that
Yeah,
and the bait and
yeah,
switch that you described
yeah.
in the cult process.
Um, one of one of the things I was thinking in terms of corporations is, if they want to do that, I would also suggest, bring in different ones, right? If you're going to bring in one group of people who are offering a service, you should bring in multiple groups that are going to do this, because not everybody in your company is going to get a benefit from one particular thing that is being offered. I I think that if you were going to do that and go into a corporation and say, this is based on Buddhist practice, we're going to be real honest with you, this is based on Buddhist practice. You can do this without the very specific teachings connected to it, and this is how we're going to show it to you. If you want to learn more after we're done with this basic work that we're doing here in relationship to your company, we're happy to present that information to you. I wouldn't have a problem with that, and I wouldn't think that that's not culty to me.
So it seems a key part of not being culty, even if you're a religious group, is to be transparent as possible about who you are, what you do, how it all works.
Yes.
That seems to be a really key
Right.
thing. Because
Right.
other than that, I mean, it's persuasion both ways, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. The big issue here is the deception. Why are you bringing people to your product? Why are you bringing people to your belief system? Are you bringing them to the belief system because you want them to be happier, healthier, more connected to themselves, more connected to the world? Or are you doing it because you need to make a buck? And so you're going to do everything you can to be able to sell this thing because you have to make sure you feed your family and you don't care how it happens, right? That's the difference.
Hmm.
And that's what is that? That's like the fourth step, right? Is deception. Or the second step. It's get people when they're vulnerable and lure them with deception, right? So I'm going to find you when you are at the lowest point of your life, and I'm going to sell you on what I know will get you to come in, which is an overall worldview that will solve all of your problems. And then you're going to do everything you can to stay connected to me because you want to keep having those good feelings that you get by being connected to my group. That's the cult, like 1, 2, 3, that's the cult phenomenon. And so if you're not doing that, if you are maybe you are getting people when they're vulnerable, but if you're going to them, not being deceptive, but being very clear and open and saying to them, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we have seen it help other people. We hope it will help you. If you have any questions, let us know, and we will answer all of this. And this is what our belief system is based on. And then you're not getting into cult territory.
And another aspect from your list is to make it easy to leave, or at least make it okay to leave.
Right, right. Yeah, there shouldn't be any reason why someone can't leave a group. There also should be no reason why someone can't question the leader. If anybody ever tells you that you can't ask questions, or they make you feel badly for asking questions, that's another one. That somehow you're stupid or uninformed or putting down the leader for having asked the question, then that's also a big red flag.
Perhaps even encouraging questions, even of fundamental premises, is a good inoculation in a religious group against slipping into that more kind of cultic, not Celtic, by the way, cultic.
Not cultic.
It's okay if you're Scottish, that's fine. You can be a Scottish religious person, but just don't be cultic. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating. Gosh, there's so many subtleties to this. And Hoodwinked. This book, you talk about the anxiety economy. You talk about cults, and you talk about how they market, and then you talk very interestingly about how social media, knowingly or unknowingly, replicates some of these dynamics and some of these processes, and how also we can be aware of the impact of that on us and help us
Mm-hmm.
resist and choose perhaps more wisely what we engage with. Yeah. So it's a really interesting book. I recommend it. It's Prometheus books.
Prometheus books, yes.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to say as we bring this to an end? It's been very fascinating, by the way, and thank you for grappling with some of these questions. It's really, really.
No,
good.
I thought it was great. It took us a little while to get to some of this stuff, but it was great. And sometimes it takes that, and you don't get it on the first try, and that's okay. I would just say to people that one of the things that we didn't talk about is why are we seeing this idea of cults being more pervasive right now? And some of that is that cults are merely people venerating an idea or a person. And that's what that's what the definition of this was in the 17th century. This idea of a cult being Jonestown or Heaven's Gate or Charles Manson is a very limited time frame when we think about this. This is something that happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And by 2000, with social media, the definition of cult began to change. And so it has all of these factors, but it isn't necessarily so that a cult is deadly, that a cult is always going to be utterly detrimental to your life, that there is in fact a spectrum of cults. And one of the things I talk about in the book is I talk about brand cults to influencers as cult light, to conspiracy theorists, to multi-level marketing. And it's not that you move from one to the next, to the next, to the next, but that there's more extremism as you move from one part of the spectrum to the other. And so this idea of cult, it can be good sometimes. It isn't necessarily a derogatory term. Sometimes it is. And certainly if you're talking about multi-level marketing or something like NXIVM, yes, they are not a good thing. But being part of a brand cult doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take over your life in the same way. It will become part of your identity, but it isn't going to take over your life in the same way, or it shouldn't.
Yeah, fascinating. And in the book, you also mention characters that some of the viewers may have heard about. Teal Swan, for example, you have a whole special section devoted to her, profiling her.
Mm-hmm. When it becomes something beyond, again, when we're talking about marketing, or when you're talking traditionally about marketing, it has been transactional. I need something, I go to the store, I buy it, I bring it home. When it becomes something beyond that, that's when you need to start thinking about it in terms of your life. If you are buying a product or a service from someone and it is beyond transactional, just do a gut check, right? And say, am I giving this product or service or person more value or attention than they deserve? And the final thing that I will say, because this is the key thing that everybody needs to know, is that anyone can be pulled into a cult. That we are all at some point in our lives vulnerable, whether it's being bereaved, whether it's moving to a new town, whether it's losing a job, and that opens us up to new belief systems and ideas that we might question at other times in our lives. And so what people always say is, oh, I'm too smart. No, there's really smart people who've been pulled into cults before. And it's also something that we talk about in terms of media. It's called the third person effect. Oh, this advertising stuff, it affects everybody else, but it doesn't affect me. And it's usually someone who has like a Gap t-shirt or a Budweiser hat on their head. So no, it does.
This has been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.